What would compel medieval builders to construct an elaborate fortress with no strategic value, no water source, and no apparent purpose, except to seal something inside rather than keep invaders out? In the shadowy forests of the Czech Republic, approximately 47 kilometers north of Prague, stands a structure so peculiar in its design and location that it has baffled historians for centuries. Houska Castle doesn't perch dramatically on a strategic hillside overlooking valuable trade routes or fertile valleys. It doesn't guard a precious water source or protect a vulnerable border. Instead, this Gothic fortress stands in relative isolation, seemingly constructed to protect the outside world from something within its foundations. Welcome to Houska Castle, a fortress not built to keep invaders out, but to keep something far more sinister trapped inside. Unlike most medieval castles, which were strategically positioned for military advantage, Houska Castle sits in a remote location with no significant tactical value. Built in the early 13th century during the reign of Ottokar II of Bohemia, its architecture reveals a curious anomaly that has fueled centuries of speculation. The castle's design suggests it was constructed from the inside out, with defensive features pointing inward rather than outward. Architectural historians note that medieval castles typically featured defensible positions against external threats, high walls facing outward, narrow windows for archers, and moats encircling the perimeter. Yet Houska's configuration presents an architectural puzzle. Its fortifications appear designed to contain something within its walls rather than protect against outside invasion. The most compelling evidence for Houska's containment purpose lies directly beneath the chapel, where a bottomless pit supposedly opens into the earth's depths. According to local lore, this yawning chasm wasn't just a natural geological formation, it was believed to be a gateway to hell itself. Medieval accounts describe this pit as unnaturally deep, with witnesses claiming that rocks thrown into its depths never produced sounds of impact. More disturbing were reports of strange, unearthly vapours rising from the abyss, and the sounds of inhuman screams echoing up from below. In an era dominated by religious cosmology, such phenomena weren't merely geological curiosities, they represented tangible evidence of hell's proximity. Historical records suggest that before the castle's construction, local authorities conducted a grim experiment to determine the nature of the pit. Several prisoners condemned to death were offered pardons if they would agree to be lowered into the hole by rope to report what they saw. According to the legend, the first volunteer was lowered into the darkness. After only a few seconds, his horrified screams echoed up from below. When pulled back to the surface, witnesses claimed the man appeared to have aged decades in minutes. His hair turned white, his mind lost to madness. Before his death days later, he allegedly spoke of half-human creatures with wings, grotesque hybrid beasts, and shadowy entities that attempted to possess him. While modern historians regard the prisoner story as apocryphal, geological surveys confirm that the castle does indeed sit atop a significant geological anomaly, a series of limestone caverns and fissures that penetrate deep into the earth. Following these disturbing events, the decision was made not to seal the hole with mere rocks or timber. Such materials might deteriorate over time. Instead, an entire castle would be constructed over the site, with a chapel positioned directly above the pit. The theological thinking behind this design was twofold. First, to place the weight of a massive stone structure over the opening, and second, to position consecrated ground, the chapel, as a spiritual seal over whatever malevolence lurked below. Construction records from the period indicate an unusual urgency to the project. While medieval castles typically required decades to complete, historical documents suggest Houska was built with remarkable speed, prioritizing the chapel's completion over more practical defensive structures. The castle's architecture reveals other peculiarities: unusually thick foundation walls reinforced with iron bands, and a perplexing absence of a water source, kitchen, or defensive fortifications that would make long-term human habitation possible. These architectural anomalies have led some historians to conclude that Houska wasn't designed primarily for human occupation, but served essentially as an elaborate supernatural prison, a stone and mortar plug over what locals feared was a literal gateway to hell. At the heart of Houska Castle lies its most enigmatic feature, the chapel. Positioned directly over the alleged hellmouth, this sacred space represents the spiritual cornerstone of the entire containment strategy. Medieval Christianity held that consecrated ground served as a powerful deterrent against demonic forces. By constructing a chapel directly above the pit, the builders created not just a physical barrier, but a metaphysical one. The chapel's interior decoration provides further evidence of its unusual purpose. Unlike typical medieval religious spaces, which featured predominantly biblical imagery and saints, Houska's chapel walls display an unusual concentration of paintings depicting the eternal battle between good and evil. Particularly notable is a fresco showing a hybrid creature, half human, half beast, with grotesque features that medieval art historians suggest represents emerging demonic entities. Architectural analysis reveals that the chapel's foundation incorporates unusual reinforcement techniques not commonly found in ecclesiastical buildings of the period. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2016 confirmed anomalous density patterns beneath the chapel floor, consistent with multiple reinforcement layers, physical evidence that supports the containment theory. The castle's interior decoration provides further clues to its supernatural purpose. Medieval castles typically displayed artworks celebrating noble family achievements, hunting scenes, or religious devotion. Houska's original frescoes, however, present an unusually high concentration of scenes depicting demonic creatures, hybrid monsters, and battles between celestial and infernal forces. Art historians note that one particularly striking fresco shows a winged creature with both avian and reptilian features, not the standardized devil of medieval iconography, but something far more primordial. Another infamous painting depicts a human figure transforming into a beast-like entity, perhaps representing the corrupting influence of whatever forces the castle was built to contain. Documentation from a 1597 inventory describes additional artwork that has since been lost or painted over, including representations of creatures neither of heaven nor earth, but of some domain beneath. The inventory notes that several visiting clerics recommended these images be destroyed, considering them too accurate in their depiction of that which should not be known. Modern geological studies offer potential scientific explanations for some of Houska's mysteries. The castle sits in a region rich with limestone formations. Limestone landscapes frequently develop sinkholes, caves, and vertical shafts formed by water erosion of the soluble rock. These natural features can create impressive vertical drops that might indeed appear bottomless to medieval observers without modern measuring equipment. Geologists have identified that Houska Castle sits above a significant karst formation, a landscape formed from the dissolution of soluble rocks such as limestone. Such formations often produce unusual acoustic effects. Sound waves can bounce through connected cave systems in ways that distort noise, potentially explaining reports of strange sounds emerging from the pit. The vapours described in historical accounts likely have geological explanations as well. Limestone caves frequently emit gases, as organic material decomposes in underground chambers or as groundwater levels shift. These natural emissions could include carbon dioxide, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, the latter producing a distinctive rotten egg smell, often associated with sulphurous, hellish imagery. However, geological explanations don't account for the peculiar architectural choices made at Houska. If medieval builders merely encountered a dangerous sinkhole, why construct an elaborate castle rather than simply filling the opening? The excessive resources dedicated to this remote location suggest the perceived threat was considered extraordinary. Historical records indicate that despite its substantial construction, Houska Castle spent much of its early existence with minimal human occupation. Unlike traditional castles, which bustled with nobles, servants, and military personnel, documentary evidence suggests Houska maintained only a skeleton crew of caretakers, primarily clergy associated with the chapel, who performed regular rituals believed to reinforce the supernatural containment. Financial records from the period show substantial expenditures for religious paraphernalia, unusual quantities of holy water, consecrated candles, and ritual implements. Ledgers document regular visits from specialized clergy members, described as having expertise in matters of spiritual containment, suggesting ongoing ecclesiastical efforts to maintain whatever supernatural barriers the castle was designed to create. Inhabitants reported persistent unusual phenomena, inexplicable cold spots, tools and objects that moved without human intervention, and livestock that became inexplicably agitated when brought near the chapel. A 1497 letter from a castle administrator to his ecclesiastical superior describes conditions unsuitable for extended habitation by those of nervous disposition and requests additional spiritual protection measures. following an incident where 3 guards reportedly witnessed a winged figure of substantial dimensions attempting to exit through the chapel floor. As centuries passed, Houska Castle changed hands multiple times, yet curiously few owners chose to make it their primary residence, despite its substantial construction. Historical property records indicate periods of abandonment unusual for a structure of its size and quality, suggesting reputation may have discouraged occupancy. The castle's history took a particularly dark turn during the early 18th century, when it briefly became the research headquarters for a group of occult practitioners led by a Swedish nobleman. Historical accounts suggest this group conducted rituals specifically designed to access whatever forces were contained beneath the castle. Their activities reportedly ended after a catastrophic event described in parish records only as an unfortunate manifestation which claimed several lives. The surviving members disbanded immediately, and the nobleman returned to Sweden, where historical accounts indicate he lived as a recluse, refusing to discuss his experiences at Houska. During World War II, the castle's dark reputation attracted attention from the Nazi SS, specifically the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi Ancestral Research Division interested in occult power. Under orders from Heinrich Himmler, who held strong occult beliefs, Nazi researchers reportedly conducted experiments at Houska between 1940 and 1943. Local witnesses reported unusual equipment being transported into the castle and strange lights visible at night. The full extent of these activities remains unclear, as most records were destroyed when the war ended. In the post-war period, Houska Castle gradually transformed from forbidden ground to tourist destination, though it never achieved the popularity of other Czech castles like Karlstein or Prague Castle. Today, visitors can tour portions of the structure, including the infamous chapel built over the supposed hellmouth. Modern investigators have documented unusual phenomena that continue to defy simple explanation. Electronic equipment frequently malfunctions within certain castle areas, particularly near the chapel. Audio recordings captured in the chapel have repeatedly registered sounds with no visible source, primarily low-frequency growls, and what sound technicians describe as non-linguistic vocalizations. Thermal imaging conducted in 2008 identified persistent cold spots in the chapel floor that maintain temperatures 8 to 10 degrees cooler than surrounding areas, regardless of seasonal conditions or heating efforts. Geologists confirm no water sources or natural features that would explain these consistent temperature anomalies. In 2012, a team of speleologists attempted to map whatever cave system might exist beneath the castle, but encountered unusual difficulties. Their equipment registered conflicting depth measurements, and team members reported disorientation and overwhelming feelings of dread that forced them to abandon the investigation. The lead researcher later noted, "In 20 years of cave exploration, I've never encountered a site that so consistently resisted scientific documentation." Among the castle's most peculiar features is its significant bat population. While bats commonly inhabit old structures, biologists note the unusual concentration and behaviour of Houska's bat colonies. The castle hosts one of Central Europe's largest hibernation sites for the rare Barbastelle bat, with population densities far exceeding typical patterns. More intriguing is the bat's behaviour. Wildlife biologists studying the colonies have documented unusual flight patterns, where bats consistently circle the chapel area, rather than exiting directly to nearby forests, with richer feeding opportunities. Some researchers speculate that the bats may be responding to electromagnetic anomalies or air current patterns unique to the castle's construction. Medieval texts often associated bats with liminal spaces between worlds due to their status as creatures of neither day nor night, neither ground nor sky. In European folklore, bats were frequently considered guardians against evil, their presence believed to confuse demonic entities due to their erratic flight patterns. Could the castle's unusual design have inadvertently created the perfect habitat for these natural demonic deterrents? Modern architectural analysis has identified several features that reinforce the containment theory. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal the castle's foundations extend significantly deeper than necessary for structural support alone, with unusual reinforcement patterns beneath the chapel. The castle's windows present another anomaly. Medieval castles typically featured narrow, outward-flaring apertures designed to allow defenders to shoot outward while providing minimal target for incoming projectiles. Several of Houska's original windows show an inverted design, wider on the inside, narrowing toward the exterior. A configuration that would make little sense for defensive purposes, but would theoretically make it more difficult for something to exit from within. Acoustic engineering studies demonstrate that the castle's layout creates unusual sound patterns. The chapel's design generates what audio engineers call destructive interference, sound wave patterns that cancel each other out, creating zones of near silence. This design feature, unusual for medieval architecture, which typically amplified prayer and chanting, would theoretically dampen sounds emerging from below the chapel. Recent geological surveys have confirmed that Houska Castle sits atop a significant geological anomaly, a network of vertical shafts and caverns created through limestone erosion. Modern equipment has measured the main shaft, extending at least 175 meters downward, before branching into horizontal passages currently too narrow for human exploration. Environmental testing conducted in 2019 detected unusual gas compositions emerging from fissures near the castle, including elevated levels of hydrogen sulfide and several unidentified organic compounds. Atmospheric chemists noted that these emissions differ significantly from typical limestone cave gases, containing complex carbon chains more commonly associated with deep geological deposits or volcanic activity, neither of which should be present in this region. Seismic monitoring equipment installed in 2017 has registered what geologists term microtremors, originating from beneath the castle at irregular intervals. These vibrations follow no established pattern associated with known geological processes in the region and remain unexplained. Psychologists who have studied visitor reactions at Houska Castle note consistent patterns of discomfort, reported by people with no prior knowledge of the site's reputation. Environmental psychologists suggest the castle's unusual acoustics, lighting conditions, and architectural proportions may trigger subconscious discomfort by violating expected spatial patterns. Infrasonics, sound frequencies below human hearing range, have been detected throughout the castle, but concentrate particularly in the chapel area. Scientific research has established that infrasonic frequencies between 7 and 19 Hz can induce feelings of fear, unease, and the sensation of a presence, as these frequencies resonate with human eyeballs and internal organs. Engineering analysis suggests the castle's architecture may unintentionally amplify naturally occurring infrasonic vibrations from the cave system below. Cognitive scientists point out that these environmental factors, combined with the power of suggestion from touring guides who relate the castle's legends, create ideal conditions for what researchers call experiential projection, the tendency to interpret ambiguous stimuli according to expected patterns. Yet these psychological explanations encounter limitations when addressing documented physical phenomena at the site: equipment malfunctions, temperature anomalies, and gas emissions that appear to have objective, measurable properties independent of human perception. Caretakers and staff who spend significant time at Houska Castle today report a complex relationship with the site's reputation. Many acknowledge experiencing unexplained events while maintaining professional skepticism about supernatural interpretations. A current castle administrator who has worked at Houska for 11 years stated in a 2018 interview, "I don't necessarily believe in demons or hellgates, but I've experienced enough unusual occurrences here that I maintain certain practices. I don't remain in the chapel alone after sunset. I don't bring certain objects into the castle. These aren't superstitions so much as respecting patterns I've observed over time." Security personnel report consistent equipment failures, motion detectors that activate without visible triggers, security cameras that develop unexplained interference in specific locations, and battery-powered devices that discharge rapidly in certain rooms, despite functioning normally elsewhere in the structure. Preservation specialists working on restoration projects note unusual difficulties completing work in some areas, particularly the chapel. A conservator working on fresco restoration in 2021 documented a pattern of tools being moved overnight despite the room being securely locked, and pigments that failed to adhere properly despite being successfully used in other castle areas. How should we evaluate Houska Castle's mysteries in the modern era? The site presents an unusual convergence of verifiable facts and folklore. Archaeological evidence confirms the castle's unusual construction sequence, with a chapel built first, contrary to typical medieval castle construction patterns, where defensive structures took priority. Historical documents verify the castle's minimal, strategic value and unusual occupancy patterns throughout its history. Geological studies confirm the presence of significant underground formations beneath the structure. Environmental testing documents anomalous gas emissions and temperature patterns that defy simple explanation. Yet the more spectacular elements of Houska's reputation, demonic manifestations, the prisoner experiment, and supernatural containment purpose, remain firmly in the realm of legend rather than documented history. The earliest written accounts of these stories date from the 16th century, several hundred years after the castle's construction, suggesting possible retrospective mythologizing of an unusual structure. Modern researchers from various disciplines suggest Houska likely represents a fascinating intersection of natural phenomena, medieval belief systems, and architectural anomalies that combine to create extraordinary legends. The unusual geological features beneath the castle would have appeared profoundly mysterious to medieval observers, lacking scientific explanations for such formations. The central mystery of Houska Castle remains its purpose. If not for defense, water access, trade control, or other typical medieval castle functions, why commit substantial resources to such an isolated location? Historical records confirm the castle was commissioned directly by Bohemian King Ottokar II, rather than a lesser noble, suggesting the project held unusual importance. Royal financial records indicate significant expenditure on the project despite ongoing military campaigns that strained royal resources during this period. Such allocation decisions suggest the king perceived substantial value, strategic, symbolic, or otherwise, in the Houska project. Comparative architectural historians note similarities between Houska's design and a small number of other European structures from roughly the same period that folklore also associates with supernatural containment. These include certain sections of Houska Castle in Bohemia, elements of Montségur in France, and features of the now-ruined Wewelsburg in Germany. Though geographically dispersed, these structures share unusual architectural features, including reinforced foundations, chapel prominence, and locations associated with geological anomalies. This pattern suggests the possibility that Houska represents not a unique aberration, but an example of a specific, if rare, medieval architectural category. Structures designed in response to geological features that medieval builders interpreted through supernatural frameworks. What can we conclude about Houska Castle with certainty? Archaeological evidence confirms it was built in an unusual location with minimal strategic value. Its construction prioritized the chapel over defensive features, a reversal of typical castle building sequence. The structure incorporates architectural anomalies that defy conventional explanation by castle design standards of its era. Geological studies verify the presence of significant cave formations beneath the castle, including vertical shafts of impressive depth. Environmental monitoring documents persistent temperature anomalies, unusual gas emissions, and unexplained microseismic activity originating from beneath the structure. Historical records confirm minimal human occupation throughout much of its history, unusual for a substantial stone castle, suggesting something about the site discouraged habitation despite significant investment in its construction. Is Houska Castle truly a demon prison built over a gateway to hell? Modern science offers alternative explanations for many of its mysteries, yet something about this isolated fortress continues to resist complete rational explanation, preserving a core of mystery that has endured for over 8 centuries. For visitors who walk its stone corridors today, Houska Castle presents an extraordinary opportunity to step into a medieval worldview where the boundaries between natural and supernatural remained fluid, where unusual geological formations might indeed represent passageways to other realms, and where an entire castle might be constructed not to keep invaders out, but to keep something far more sinister trapped within.